Welcome everybody who's joining us. This is Open Classroom, the Brown School's digital forum for community and conversation. It's also a way for us to offer professional development to our community and a look inside the Brown School for any prospective students out there. So my name is Sarah Sims. I'm one of the Sarahs on the call today. I'm the manager of continuing education for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you for joining us. This is a webinar, which just means that we can't see or hear you, but we do really want to engage with you, and we already have been engaging with some of the folks via the chat. So please feel free to drop in the chat where you're zooming in from, share anything you like. And then throughout the program today, please leave any comments and especially any questions that you might have for Dr. Cameron and her presentation today. And we will be happy to do a Q&A at the end. This is also being live streamed on YouTube. I will drop a link to that in the chat that you can share with people as well, but we cannot monitor the chat on YouTube. So just in the Zoom. So now I'm gonna pass it off to my colleague, Sarah Birch, the other Sarah here, who's the Assistant Director for Admissions and Recruitment for the Brown School, who's gonna introduce the program and our speaker today. Sarah, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to be joining you all. I want to give a thanks to Professional Development for partnering with the Office of Admissions and Recruitment on this series that we're calling Curriculum Showcase, where we hope to give folks a little bit more of a sense of what you can learn at the Brown School. And so a very special welcome to those of you who are joining us or watching the recording who are prospective students. And so with that, I'd love to introduce today's speaker. Heather Cameron is the inaugural Michael B. Kaufman Professor of Practice in Social Entrepreneurship at the Brown School. She is the co-chair of the Social Impact Leadership Concentration and the chair of the Social Entrepreneurship Specialization for the Master of Social Work program. Cameron is the founder of several award-winning social enterprises in the fields of education and sports for community development. As an Ashoka Fellow, she has worked all over the world. Cameron develops and teaches a transdisciplinary curriculum in social innovation and entrepreneurship, advises students at the master's and doctoral levels, builds career and enterprise pipelines, and pursues research on comparative urban education and development. Today, she will be exploring different ways to start and sustain social change, from girls boxing to community cooperatives. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Professor Cameron.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and the whole team that's making this curriculum showcase available. And thank you guys here who are participating for joining with me to think a bit about different ways of achieving social change. I was asked to give some more sort of personal remarks about how I have worked as a social entrepreneur. Social entrepreneurship might not seem that it fits in a social work school or school of public health, but all of us who are concerned about not just learning about how to create change, but actually implementing change and working with others to solve big problems need to also have skills about implementation, about building prototypes, about trying to build new things, not just advocate for them. So I'm going to be speaking about how there's the different ways that me, together with many others, have tried to do exactly that, create change, and to see how it started with not being much older than you guys at 26, and then all the way to my work here at the university. So if we can advance the slide. I have always been very concerned about creating a better world. And so when I was in Berlin doing my PhD studies in social and political thought, I was learning about how certain people were turning into like critical thinkers who were trying to challenge some of the worst, dictatorships in European history, and other people who just kind of went along with it. And I'm wondering, why is it that some people choose to fight and other people just choose to conform? And so if we go to the next slide, I was looking at, all of these questions of injustice, and especially injustice towards women and girls in our society, being in a patriarchal society where a lot of the time women and girls' voices weren't being heard, people who were different weren't being heard, and it was seeming that we were not being able to advance on doing a lot of problem solving based on a lot of injustices. But the sort of people who I was learning with and thinking about, coming, if we go to the next slide, from, you know, the Frankfurt School and people like Adorno, or people like Michel Foucault, who was known for his work around decarceration and prisoners' rights and work on the prison, also obviously work on sexuality, to people like Charles Baudelaire and Judith Butler. You know, I realized that the sort of change I wanted to see, the sort of way I wanted to myself be an activist and to improve my community, my chosen community there in Berlin. I was there also kind of as a migrant visiting from Canada, that it wasn't going to be done in the university seminar, right? That the university was an important place to train my thinking and to grow, but definitely wasn't going to be the way I wanted to create change. So going to the next slide, I realized it was a lot about shifting power, not just shifting ideas, but actually trying different things out. So like any other good scholarship student writing her PhD on really complex theories of German intellectual history, I decided my way to think about shifting power would be around creating a boxing gym. So if we see here on the next image, I spent 6 years while at the university and then building out a gym in my neighborhood in Berlin, because I realized that physical activity, giving girls and women and, you know, a lot of queer people a safe space to work out and develop their leadership capacity, as well as having a different relationship to their body, would give women and girls and people like me, again, this wasn't trying to help, it was definitely trying to help others, but it was more from a perspective of mutual aid, of self-help, of membership, not an idea of like, I'm going to go somewhere far away. It turned out we ended up going somewhere far away, but starting here in my own neighborhood, working with my neighbors, working with my neighbors' children, working with the neighborhood schools to create a space which was challenging gender norms, which was fighting against gender-based violence, and that was creating an opportunity for us to think differently about leadership and to give kids and young women an opportunity to be involved in local government and changes. But this was all basically a volunteer-run, membership-based organization. So we'll see a few more images from here. So again, young people, this is also a young social worker, Sarah Bitterling, who worked together and helped develop our girls programs. And then just realizing that by creating communities of strong girls, girls who knew how to articulate an argument, girls who were able to face challenges in the boxing gym, and physical challenges, perhaps fitness challenges, but then be able to take that sense of pride and achievement into their schoolwork. Girls who rethought their relationships with the boys and men in their life in order to encourage a much more active approach to taking care of themselves and their communities. And then also, since in Germany, the sports clubs are often kind of connected in different ways into municipal government because we have access to the facilities, these young women and girls were often invited to speak about what was important to them, not just in terms of sports policy, but in terms of parks policy, in terms of public space, in terms of girls' safety. So what started off as quite a small project based on my love of sports and of boxing and knowing how boxing really challenges you and brings out all of your different fears and strengths in order to overcome them, we were really able to, create something good. And because it was so strange to a lot of German community activists and sports people that we had such a great mix of people. We had a lot of Turkish, it's a very working class Turkish area where I live. So we had a lot of their kids. Their kids often or female kids were often kept out of gym class and out of school because it was seen that doing gym class or doing swimming and other sports like that were transgressing against different modesty rules, right? But we realized that by encouraging girls to learn self-defense, their families were happy to support that. So we were often the only physical activities and sports that these girls were allowed to take. And so while other people in Berlin were frustrated by not allowing, girls to integrate, I'm like, we need to think differently again about how we can encourage more people to take part. So because of our visibility and the fact that we were making this all work as a volunteer organization, we got a lot of press attention. We got won a lot of prizes, and I was becoming more and more aware about what we could do to help other activists in other places. So let's go forward. And so the question becomes, if you're trying to really create change, like if I'm really concerned, if we're concerned about violence in our communities, in my case, I was thinking about gender-based violence, but God help us, there's enough issues of violence in our community here in St. Louis, and trying to think about different ways. It's like, we can't change everything. So where's the point of leverage? How can we use what we have in order to create change way beyond what we would be able to do directly ourselves? And so once we were stable in Berlin and able and financially self-sustaining and able to move forward, these are all the sorts of things that we talk about with social entrepreneurship. It's like, how do you create organizations that can sustain themselves, who don't need to ask philanthropists permission to do anything, but can actually do it based on our own steam? Then I was asked to try and help other organizations. So if we go forward again. And so then Box Girls International was born. We had the opportunity to work with activists out of Nairobi, Kenya to start with, people who were already using boxing and sports to help girls in informal settlements come together, learn with each other, become ambitious about their studies, become girls whose confidence and ability to finish school in some of these challenging environments are like raised just by being part of a strong girls and women's community, and to create that first of all in Nairobi. And there's some really excellent videos online from Vice and others showing off the work of Box Girls Nairobi that we'll put later into the chat. And then after that, after helping them get started, we were invited to come down to Cape Town and to work out in some of the informal settlements outside of Cape Town. I'd also love to hear with any of you in the chat if you've had the opportunity to be to any of these places or see any of these sorts of environments, because those of us who are concerned about girls' education and girls' safety, it's very, very challenging environments with a lot of awesome activists doing the work. But we realized that by helping with different curriculum and impact measurement strategies, we could help these local activists get programs started and grow and learn, and we'd be able to learn from them in terms of the way that they teach and the ways that the girls, best react. So now we've got a short video that we can share, which shows some of this work in South Africa.
Girls deserve to feel safe and confident. Every day, women wake up and are faced with fighting gender-based violence. I have faced stereotypes about women being weak all my life. Through Box Girls, I want to knock down gender norms. At Box Girls, we are all champions. Some of the girls I have coached have really excelled in the sport. Learning to fight like a girl is not about starting fights, it's about protecting each other. After gaining self-confidence, a lot of girls want to participate in leadership courses. It's exciting to see how feeling safe can free you. After stepping out of that ring, I know there's nothing these young boxers can do. The fighting against gender violence in South Africa is nowhere near over, but I hope we are making a dent by teaching our girls self-defense.
Yes, so you can see there with our beautiful and smart and fierce young women from Box Girls South Africa, that it's a way And I look forward to discussing some of these ideas with you guys afterwards in the chat, but also please feel free to give comments now into the chat as we go. But how to provide, again, infrastructure for things that the community wants to do, right? And to be thinking hard about how do you attract people. So often when we talk about social media, that we talk about competing for attention. But again, how do you attract young people who have other options? How do you make sure that you're offering them what they want? And how do you make sure that you're focused on leveraging the resources that you've been entrusted with in the best possible way for the community, not necessarily just in the best possible way for your organization, which unfortunately can be two different things. So again, when we're learning and teaching about social entrepreneurship with our social workers, public health and policy students, it's a lot about thinking, and obviously all of our community partners, but it's a lot about thinking, you know, how with the different resources we have, and we might have more than we think that we do, with that, how do we create with the communities we're serving the best possible impact? Often people are like, well, the project worked, that's okay. That's not enough really anymore, right? Because there is not to be thinking in a scarcity mindset, but just to be thinking in a stewardship mindset. How can I best leverage what I have with others to create change, rather than how do I just make my organization run smoothly and I'll be satisfied with that? So part of what I want to talk about is about some of the things that worked well for us and some of the things that didn't work well. Those of you who've had some exposure to entrepreneurship know that some of the most fun talks are about favorite failures or whatever. So while we were very successful in Berlin and able to create an organization which still exists and is continuing to work even after I exited, and I was very happy to see it thrive and take on even different issues as different issues come up in the community, working again with trans children, working with refugees, thinking about different ways of understanding gender-based violence in a wider sense than it made sense for me 25 years ago. But for us to just keep thinking, how do we do things in a new way? So I'm going to take a look here at the next slide, which is sort of a graphic about types of thinking about impact, right? So, and I think all of us who've been thinking about questions of public health and social work and policy, this will not be that new. But you can have, starting on the far left, you can have projects which are focused on direct service, yeah? So like you work in a population needing services, food, etc., and you directly serve them, right? And that they, by serving them, you benefit their well-being. This can be something sort of as simple as like a food bank, a needle exchange, whatever, but you're directly giving the service. This is often where people stop thinking that social work is, right? It's like social work is just helping people, or public health as, again, sort of like directly helping, doctors directly attending to a wound or something, as compared to thinking about a wider systemic change. But as we move towards the right, we'll be thinking more about systemic changes. The next step is often described as scaled direct service, which basically means you're still doing direct service, you're just doing it in a way which benefits from economies of scale. So rather than just having one needle exchange, you have 4 needle exchanges, right? And can benefit from the fact that you can, one, often save money when you have 4 similar programs operating. You don't necessarily need 4 times as many cars or 4 times as many accountants or 4 times as many HR professionals in order to run 4 programs. You can have more impact without having to actually grow your organization. And also the fact that if you have 4 sites potentially doing similar programs, you can innovate. That's the other thing we stress a lot in terms of social entrepreneurship and innovation, is to be thinking about how do we get more ambitious as social workers and public health people, or just as citizens. How do we get more ambitious thinking about how do we solve problems? And so rather than just trying to polish the edges of an existing solution, how do we go about trying new solutions? So again, some of the services provided to unhoused people in St. Louis have also been exploring different ways of providing food, right? Realizing that the food that people eat has a huge effect on their health. And if they're only getting food which doesn't necessarily support healthy living, then we're not necessarily helping as much as we could. So again, with 4 different sites, you're able to offer different diets, see what sort of food can be introduced, understand, learn from one site and then apply it in different places. I also often joke that, like, for example, McDonald's is scaled direct service. And I'm sure we've all experienced in the summer how there's all sorts of really great milkshakes or ice cream cones or whatever little summer treats that are offered. But then later, they're not always there. And I asked, I'm like, well, why can't I get my orange chocolate milkshake or whatever? And they were like, oh, no, that was just a promotion. And when they say a promotion, it means basically a test, right? So that you're able to try different things out and find out what would people want to have. And if we take some of that logic and apply it to much more serious problems than milkshakes, if we applied it to maternal health, if we think about, again, about the situation of the unhoused, or in my case around gender-based violence, it allows you to make sure there's a floor of service, that there's a basic service which isn't touched, but that you have the opportunity to try different things and to find ways to basically improve how you're solving the problem. Moving on from that is, again, systems change. Yeah. So again, taking a new model, which isn't just sort of directly, as the social workers say, pulling people out of the river, not directly helping somebody in the sense that you're only focused at the very end of the chain of things that have gone wrong, but looking earlier on, looking upstream, as we say, to causes of the problems, and then working together with funders, with government, with other organizations, with the university. A lot of our colleagues and myself here at the Brown School are involved, working together with practitioners in the community to help what they're doing be informed by even more research or international examples or things that they can use and grow with. But how did those groups get together to basically create a new standard, to fight for a new standard? Okay, so those of you who are interested in public health here, or like working in the hospital and so on, will know that public health has a very proud tradition of changing people's behavior, whether that be the acceptability of drinking and driving, whether that be seatbelts, whether that be smoking. Again, always new challenges on the horizon, but finding a way to get people together to argue and to make the case for a new way of doing it. Beforehand, the car companies were not putting in seatbelts, right? But through a lot of data, and then through a lot of behavioral change programming developed, together with public health people, able to get it so that it's no longer acceptable. But that had to be fought for. That was something where a group of activisty people got together and said, we would save a lot of lives through seatbelts. How do we get it done? And then moving from systems change, where you're still arguing people, but you're building a base. Framework change is the idea that you've been able to push the idea so far that the mindset is that when I get into my car, snowy day or not, I put my seatbelt on immediately. And in fact, I turn around and looked at everybody else in my car and say, put on your seatbelt. Yeah. 60 years ago, that was not the case, right? That's an example of how people's way of looking at a problem has changed that far. You can see in something that I know more about around girls' education. Yeah. Also, it was not a case where we had everybody on board. 110 years ago, women would not have been here on our beautiful campus at Washington University in St. Louis. And it was seen as a distraction to the men. It was seen that, why are we bothering to educate these people, right, when they're just going to be wives, or they're just going to be, in fact, making it difficult for them. If they have this education, they can't use it. And now through systems change and people advocating for women to begin with, yes, elite women, but getting more and more people involved. Now it's at the point where in most countries, it's seen as totally normal and in fact desirable that women are at universities. But only 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. So I think this is an exciting thing to be thinking about as we're trying to be doing change, is that we can move from directly solving a problem to finding out ways to doing it at scale, to finding out ways to actually change the playing field with some other strong partners, right? And then to the point where in the future, hopefully are the way that we think about gender-based violence, or what's acceptable for how men treat women and how boys treat girls and how we all treat each other, that will change, and that will be able to create, stronger societies because of it. So we're going to be thinking about this impact as we move to the next section. So it's about, again, falling in love with your problem, not with your current version of the solution. So go again. So this is a graph of a design thinking process, right? I hope some of you have kind of looked into design thinking and different ways of mapping systems thinking, because it's a great tool for activists to be understanding both how to come up with new ideas. This is sort of a new idea map, but also to be thinking hard about, like, how can we best address the issues which are coming up now. In my experience, and then also one of my mistakes at the beginning, was to think I knew what people needed, right? That I was a boxer, I was a young athlete, young scholar athlete, and I wanted to create more opportunities for people, and I thought it would kind of take care of itself. But then as our group got bigger and more diverse, then we needed to continue to revisit our assumptions. And again, if I'm thinking, okay, we're going to empower girls through providing sports programs and leadership programs, okay, that worked. In fact, we were very successful, right? We won prizes from the German government. We won money from all of the big German companies. We had a great membership base. So as far as we were doing, we were one of the top performing NGOs in Berlin. But we realized it was only for a small group of people, about 300 people that were members of our gym, which was, a small gym. So that made sense. But that if we wanted to think about even more people who wanted, who didn't necessarily want our services, but who we thought could benefit from our services, we needed to take it into the schools. And so again, this is a model of helping you challenge the way you think about success, and having you challenge the way you understand how to make a really good fit. So for example, saying that rather than saying, decide what you want to build and build it, which might be in some ways the old sort of like engineering way of doing things. Unfortunately, it can sometimes be the social work way of doing things, where we think we know what the problem is, and then we just go and build the thing without thinking about who are the users, who are the beneficiaries, or that there's sort of a nod about community engagement without really trying to build these things from the community side up. So for example, in South Africa, where there wasn't necessarily the same quality of schooling in the informal settlements as you could expect in Germany, and the girls were exposed to many other challenges, the parents came to us and said, the girls love the boxing and that attracted them and they're here, but we want them to focus more on academics. Yeah. And so in Germany, parents had other options to get that, but in South Africa, they didn't. And so as we were listening to people, looking at the problems, we were using this model kind of build, measuring, and learning, and iterating to create different projects. So rather than saying, okay, we're box girls, we just do boxing, do whatever, if we're in love with our problem, which is about increasing, making strong girls and making safe communities, if we're in love with the idea of helping girls and women and other marginalized people be able to have positions of leadership and to be having more people working together on substantial problems, then we need to react as we go and to iterate. And so we introduced math and English classes based on what the parents and the girls wanted. We built on that by getting even more teacher buy-in. So even more students and more vulnerable students would join us. And then we had to, try different programs. Those little blue circles are like iterations. So it doesn't work immediately, right? And you're just trying to do a little prototype and to make it work. And then prototyping till it seems to basically work. Moving on, working, meaning, gets your goals done. So you're measuring how well you're meeting those goals, learning from what worked and what didn't, and then coming back to that experiment, sort of bullseye in the middle. And if it seems like it's growing, then you can continue back into building and keep iterating, right? those of you who might have some exposure into the entrepreneurship space could say, okay, well, this looks a lot like lean startup. And it is, right? It's again, this idea of what we use when we're trying to develop businesses, develop agencies, develop health interventions, and policy interventions, policy entrepreneurship, to think about ways that we can more usefully create change, okay? So this was the thing, falling in love with the problem, not with your idea, so that you can, if your idea, if your solution isn't working anymore, or isn't working as well as it could, then don't be like kind of high on your own Kool-Aid, but be like, okay, even though we're very successful in what we're doing, how can we retool? How can we become more useful? And as we'll see in the end part of my remarks here, and then I look forward to opening it up to some questions, I started thinking about different ways to grow impact, different ways that I could be more helpful, not just as a boxing coach. Like I myself was a boxing, whatever, state champion in Berlin back in '98, which seems like a long time ago, but that was my life then. And then now with all the different things that I've learned and different opportunities, you know, how can you have the most impact, right? And so the goal isn't just to become big, right? The goal is to think about what are different ways to have impact. So I'll bring up some of the sort of more common ones and things that I tried. And then I look forward to hearing from some of you about different ways you've been thinking about these issues. So if we go again. So one thing people think about is, okay, you know, if having a small NGO isn't enough, maybe you should have impact through developing government policy. It was said at the beginning that I'm an Ashoka Fellow, and Ashoka is a global organization of social innovators for the public. So there's about 3,000 people who've been selected for, you know, doing innovative work on some of these key themes. And what one of the things that I started to do in order for my organization to have an earned income stream was to do some consulting for the German government. So here you see me with a teacher trainer and my translator and co-teacher here in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, where I worked for 3 years before I joined the Brown School. And here the goal was, how do we work with the Afghan Ministry of Education, coming back to girls' education? There weren't that many people who wanted to go work in Afghanistan, but I think a lot of feminists really understand how important and even now how incredibly challenging that environment is. But working to improve the way that teachers taught students, and also how to think about ways to use physical education in order to help them with other goals. And so I was talking to one of my colleagues from Ashoka, and he's like, this might be the most impactful thing you did. And I was a little bit, to be honest, frustrated by that comment, because I'm like, you know, I built an organization that helped thousands of kids and, you know, hundreds of schools. And, you know, we developed curriculum, and we were invited to the Bundestag, which is kind of like the White House. And we did this and we did that. And he's like, yeah, you did. You know, but when you think about how many children that is, and how many teachers who will continue to teach that is, it's not as much as just, you know, the work you've done in Afghanistan over a matter of months over these last few years. Because again, if you have the possibility of working with a larger partner, for example, the Ministry of Education, or for that matter, German development money, sort of like USAID, you have the opportunity of perhaps not having your own personal stamp on it, but that shouldn't really matter, but that you're able to influence more people. So this is something I tried. And of course, there's pros and cons. So cons with this, yeah. Then the next thing I tried was digital scaling, right? So again, we've got some international people on the call. We've had lots of people calling. I hope we colored in Nigeria there. Anyway, we've had lots of people, including guests from Nigeria, again, coming together, different sports for development organizations like Box Girls, coming together, learning, building our capacity, sharing our stories, sharing our learning, sharing our impact, you know, basically doing collective lobbying. Work we were doing even before COVID, right? Moving to a digital way of teaching and learning. So that was interesting, but also again, you think, okay, how far am I getting below the surface, right? How, you know, what is teaching? What is collective work? How do we do it? And I think people are still working on really exciting, you know, digital business models in every area, including in public health and in social work. So this is also something we're excited about. and working with our colleagues in engineering and at the business school here at WashU, where we have really an excellent degree of integration. So people who come, oh, I want to study social work, I want to help, I want to do this, I want to do that, that to give you guys an opportunity to think even wider, right? And again, public health is in a really exciting time, working closer with the medical school. There's a lot of other faculty at the Brown School who are interested in doing global work, and then digital can be a piece of that. So I was also part of that and thinking about it, and we've had students working on this project. But again, that's another way to think about growing your impact without growing your organization. So we tried that, okay? And whatever, it worked, right? But what does working mean? And then, okay, the other argument can be, okay, you're gonna have impact by training the next generation. As I was recruited to this beautiful campus, I was just blown away by how different the way the Brown School and WashU thought about professors as compared to the German system where I had been working. And that in the German system, even though, again, there we'd raised lots of money and we got lots of attention, the focus was always on simply publishing. Yeah, and that's true in many places. But what was exciting about the Brown School, it's like, we need you to be visible and to have like a national profile. And because we are, a national university, an international university, but we want to see what the impact of your work is, right? We want to see you working in the community. We want to see you doing your international work. We're excited about that. While at my German university, they saw that kind of as a distraction. They're like, why are you working in schools? Why are you working with the ministry? Why are you going to Afghanistan? And I'm like, because my government asked me to, because the school principals asked me to, because I'm a professor at a public university, and I think that's exciting, and that's how we learn and advance the work, But the Brown School and WashU as a whole is like very committed to our community, and there's ways we are also learning how to do that better and continue to advance, but to think hard about what that means. But again, similar to the work in Afghanistan, it's like, how do you work with others who are multipliers? How do we help you guys launch your careers or develop your careers by more skills through professional development or joining our programs? But that's something else I tried. And I think it's always a question of like, what's going to work best. But let's keep going. You realize that this is all just kind of scratching the surface, right? That either by building your own organizations, you learn about prototyping, you learn about how things work, you have a sensitivity to what's hard and maybe what's not so hard, and how to work together. And then by doing consulting work, by building digital things, by teaching, you can have a feeling, which I think a lot of us can feel, of sort of frustration about bigger issues, right? That I would help, 20 schools outside of Cape Town get started with these projects, and then they would have lack of water delivery to the school, and the school would shut down, and it didn't matter, right? And definitely after school programs didn't matter because the kids weren't getting anything. So there's always bigger plays at work. Or again, doing work at WashU, you realize that we're working with like a very academically gifted, international group. And that is like representing a lot of the population, but obviously not everybody. So like, how do you figure out ways to go further? Yeah. So the next one. That's my salt and pepper hair there on that chicken, by the way. So if you're thinking about bigger questions, right? If you're thinking about stuff like the Sustainable Development Goals is sort of laid out by the United Nations, we were always kind of working on quality education, number 4, or gender equality, number 5. But to realize that all of this stuff is actually incredibly more structural. Yeah. So we go to the next slide. That in the United States, especially, compared to Germany and Canada, where I've otherwise spent, and South Africa, where I've spent my time working, the vast wealth and income equality creates a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve later, right? And prevents certain solutions from being implemented. So the more I was working in the United States for the last 6.5 years, the more I realized that I wasn't really interested in just teaching social entrepreneurship the old way, right? Start a business, write a business plan, get investors, right? I'd done that. I'd help other people do that. But I realized that I was no longer interested in helping individual people get wealthy. That to me seemed like not making a lot of sense, that we needed to think a lot more about structural change and about community wealth. So we go to the end, next one. So one of the new projects, 2 new research projects that I'm working on at Brown, where we have different engaged campus, but
Dr. Cameron, it looks like it's your screen has frozen a little bit. We definitely have time if you, oh, you're back. We gotcha.
oh, good.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the problem with capitalism. They're going to cut off my connection. No. All right. I was just saying this project is a national project looking at different strategies around community wealth building, right? And the opportunity for communities to get wealthy through in the widest sense, and that they have good health, that they have the financial resources that they need, that they have the community cohesion that they need, that they have the violence prevention that they need in order to succeed. And this is about redistributing the way we use the assets of the nation. Part of that's tax policy, other forms of government policy, but about inviting more people to build assets and wealth. So entrepreneurship, not just for a single entrepreneur, but again, thinking more widely. So as I just wrap up here, look at the last few images. So we're working together with an amazing community partner called We Power St. Louis, which is a Black-led organization focused on community wealth building, on early childhood education and other interventions, which is around not just how do we better play the system, but how do we change the system, and how do we build power and knowledge in our communities in order to better use them. And then finally, don't be scared by my graphic here, or almost, working with organizations that work with cooperatives and worker-owned businesses and other ways of structuring the way that the government makes investments in order for us to have a fairer economy. So I'll give you guys a teaser for something you'd learn about if you're able to come to some of our classes, which I hope some of you will be able to do. Go to the next slide. It's again moving from boxing and to fighting in a very individual way, to be thinking about how do we change the way that our economy works, right? So I was celebrated as a social entrepreneur, as somebody who built companies and who helped other organizations and activists, build nonprofit and hybrid companies. But you're moving from a model which is focused on extraction, taking people's time, taking people's environmental health, taking people's resources to build things that didn't serve them. And then how do we move this? And not in a sense of defensiveness and fighting and burning things down, but like, how do we move this forward towards an economy which is focused on the people who live there, and a living economy? And social entrepreneurship is a big part of that, about helping more communities be aware of some of the economic things going around in their communities, helping support stewardship and environmental limits on the sort of work that we do, and thinking much wider about how we serve. So this is, again, if we go to the next slide, how I think about, fighting for a better world, no longer starting off as kind of a hot-headed and stubborn 26-year-old who built a volunteer group and got a bunch of people together to run a gym and then ended up taking me all around the world. But how do we work together, especially here in St. Louis, but across the nation, to build a better and more equitable world? So I hope seeing kind of how these things fit together, how different ways of thinking about impact, about different ways about thinking about entrepreneurship can be part of your social change journey. And I look forward now to taking some questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cameron. And so did have just a couple comments in the chat. One was for me, because you got me thinking when discussing how it's really imperative to iterate and experiment and try again and pivot. I feel like we don't want to do that because we are an instant gratification society, and so many of us have this great idea and we just want to take it and run with it. And so, yeah, I wonder what your comment is on that. Just breaking away from that mindset of the instant gratification.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could instantly gratify ourselves with some of these like deep-rooted issues? Like those of you who are here in St. Louis, but unfortunately just across the country, know that we have huge issues around maternal and infant mortality. It's a project that we worked on in one of our classes about like how do we help improve those outcomes for young mothers. African American mothers here in our community are 3 times more African American babies born into St. Louis are 3 times more likely to die before they're 1 than white babies, right? And that just seems kind of ridiculous. And for those of us, or just obscene actually. And so some of these issues are really quite deep rooted, and they have long-term things that need to change in order for that to work. Like our class worked together on transportation issues with our very strong hospital here system and how they were treating women for their prenatal appointments, dealing with mistrust of the medical system, which I know many of our students in public health are thinking about. How do we do better community outreach? So some of these things you want to have that quick win, and some things are quick fixes if the people with the different power positions choose to work with you. But I think what the bigger question can be is also the way that our organizations are funded, right? If you have to write 5-year funding plans and those plans aren't often changed, or it's not seen that you can go back and say, oh, we've figured something out, we want to do it differently, that's seen as taking a risk with your funder, then it shuts down an innovation culture. So that, again, this idea of iterating and changing is a lot about funder education and funder selection, so that, and also getting away from just one way of raising money to do it, so that you can want to get things done and have that sense of urgency, because you're right, we do want to get this stuff done. We shouldn't wait any longer. But that the funder is like, okay, we know you're learning, and we know that if you're learning, you're going to push the envelope. I used to be a ski racer too, back when I was a teenager, but I wasn't crazy. And our coach would always say, look, if you're not falling, you're not going fast enough. And I'm like, and some people thought, some people I was just like in awe of about how they would like really take it to the edge. And I didn't have those skills. But I think as someone who really cares about gender-based violence, we owe it to people to try new stuff when what we have isn't working well enough, right? And so then you do need to iterate, even if it's working okay, even if it's working 85% of the time, right? That there needs to be people who are like pushing the envelope and trying new stuff and finding funders who also think that way. And that's what's exciting now, is that I think COVID showed people that there are ways of doing things, right? That's not possible. That's not possible. And now it's like, okay, yeah, it's possible. And so for us to use that openness. I see Sarah's got a question from us, our colleague up from University of Toronto, which also is where I went and did my bachelor degree, Sarah. So thanks very much for joining. Intersection between typical funding models and the ability to be flexible. Okay, well, good. But maybe I think one of the challenges is again, the power dynamics, right? How do we as social change people from public health, social work, wherever we're coming from, other professors, how do we get away from asking rich people's permission, which is basically what you're doing when you have to rely on foundation funding or individual donors, right? Because the donor classes are shifting and changing through this income inequality that I spoke about. So you're getting less people giving more money, but having that group become more homogenous with time. So how do we leverage some of the generosity of people's whose politics we like and can grow it? But how do we think about different models, membership-based models, mutual aid models, different forms of taxation, which I won't hold my breath on, but, is the way that things get done in social democracies in Europe. How can we think about that so that more ambitious, innovative things can be tried? But yeah, I saw we have a few people who are thinking about joining the school on the call. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm glad you took the time to join. But yeah, maybe some other questions in the chat. Or Sarah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, I do have another question, just speaking of, students and getting involved in this kind of work. Could you share a little bit about what our students have done in this kind of realm, what you've kind of worked with students on?
Sure. Well, we've done some great projects in the past, and I've got some pretty exciting projects right now, which some of the incoming students might be interested in. So we did do a project together with a leadership organization here in St. Louis called Focus St. Louis on infant mortality and how to make it easier for African-American women who are at more risk for having issues with their maternity and with their babies because of basically structural racism is the short answer. And so together with executives from different parts of the city and together with students in the business school, we looked at transportation issues, which is a bit of an issue in our city. And then our recommendations around how to restructure some of the transit lines, because we were very lucky that Metrolink, our transit provider, was also going through a strategic planning process at the same time. We were able to get them to slightly change some of their routes and then also introduce benches and sun and winter, weather shelters on some of the places where we knew where many of the women would be coming from, because we identified that from different work that activist groups had collected from the women, saying that it was impossible, even though the bus went directly to the hospital, waiting for the bus, being sheltered from the bus, getting on the bus when you had other children with you was really difficult. So we were able to work on that. Also then with Lyft, that was just coming into the city around non-emergency transportation. So that was a great project, which then also led our partner Flourish St. Louis. We were able to support them on a funding application they also had. So that was really great because, again, we do the research in your class and then it actually helps somebody. We also had students from public health and from social work and policy working on the Girls in the Lead websites, creating modules, talking about different aspects of reproductive health, talking about different aspects around gender identity in sports, building all sorts of different modules, which have been used by thousands of people from all over, together with my organizations based in Europe. So we were doing webinars for 200, 300 people, and then sharing resources. And then our students helped create a lot of those and follow up with different people and gather their knowledge and put it together in things that they could share. So that work is ongoing. I'll just add that to the chat. And then the last times I've been working again on these cooperatives and community-based asset building strategies, right? So I'll just put that into the chat as well, that we have opportunities for students to help us build out, again, digital resources for these websites and work together with us and WePower and some of the more innovative organizations across the country doing loans and technical assistance. So again, a different way of thinking about entrepreneurship, a different way of thinking about incubation. Yeah. And then in addition to all of that, we've got great infrastructure for those of you who are interested in starting new NGOs or new companies here at the university. So we work closely with the Scandalera Center, as well as my colleagues at the business school, who are interested in building out social business or social investing strategies. So yeah, we've had students from all over doing things. Also, a lot of international students have worked with me since I've done quite a lot of work in Asia. And I'm interested also in understanding kind of Asian models of social entrepreneurship and innovation. So yeah, so let us know in the chat something you're particularly interested in, and then maybe we can connect you directly.
Thank you. So cool. I love hearing about these different types of ventures, and hearing that our students are getting directly involved in this kind of work too, and are able to see kind of the impacts of what they're learning come to life in the field.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to maybe put some people on the spot and ask if Morgan or Chinelo, who took the time to join us here and are thinking about the Brown School, if either of you have any questions for me or from our friends here from admissions and professional development. I'm happy to take questions from anybody, but we do these in order to sort of introduce our work and be available to students who are interested in learning about faculty members' research and the topic areas. Or Susan, it's your opportunity to ask anything you wanted to know about social entrepreneurship.
While we're waiting, Dr. Cameron, I have a question about, and you might not necessarily be the one teaching these courses, but for a prospective student thinking about joining Brown, you talked about like the importance of being able to solicit and think creatively about funding partners. How are we educating our students here at Brown kind of around those tertiary skills, right? About, maybe policy or fundraising, beyond just like the core competencies of social work? How are we kind of giving our students a more well-rounded so that they are able to, start some social entrepreneurship ventures like you're talking about?
Yeah, well, we are very lucky to be one of the schools of one of the top schools of social work, or basically either the top or the second one all the time, that has a focus on developing the sort of leadership skills and innovation skills and other skills that you need in order to be part of a leadership team. So together with my colleague, Barry Rosenberg, we have a concentration, which is all on social impact leadership. So again, focusing on entrepreneurship, but also on management and leadership skills, focusing on innovation, but also on, how to effectively run an organization. And so we offer short classes called skill labs onto lots of very specific skills that you need in order to be able to execute some of the wider thoughts, that you're learning. So there's opportunities to learn about fundraising. I'll be actually teaching a fundraising class later this week around, again, best ways to present your ideas in a grant. And then there's also classes on working with government and raising money from government. And then my colleague, Professor Rosenberg, was in charge of the Jewish Federation here in St. Louis, and raised and distributed, hundreds of millions of dollars over his life. So you're learning from people who've done the work and who know the community when you come here. And then the other thing, which I always really want to stress, is that you don't have to just stay sort of in our Brown bubble, right? We have a great community here at our school, but one of the strengths of Washington University in St. Louis is that we have an excellent medical school. We have an excellent engineering school. We have an excellent business school. We have all sorts of great resources, which are like centers, right? And in terms of racial equity centers, centers focused on entrepreneurship, centers focused on art. So again, based on what you want to learn, you can be part of these different communities, be based at Brown, and then go exploring and learn things both for your professional network, but also for your own for your own career development. And so that's something that I also, just even as a faculty member, really enjoy. So I appreciate that. No, our program in social impact leadership is one of the fastest growing concentrations, I believe, because people, especially coming out of the pandemic, are realizing, how some of those skills need to be continually refreshed. And then students in the policy and in the public health programs can also take part. So I hope to see many of you here. I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciated your presentation, you sharing your work with us, but also your perspective on the Brown School and being a student here, and what that can be like. So I want to let everybody know that this presentation, along with all of our other open classrooms, are recorded and then shared on YouTube. So you can go back and watch over 200 presentations as you're interested. And we hope that you'll keep learning with us. Our next open classroom is this week on Thursday, entitled Impactful Interventions to Support Newcomer Adolescents. And then we have another curriculum showcase, so similar to this one, where you can see what what our professors are like, what our coursework is like. That's on March 23rd, and that one is about preventing suicide through safety planning. So a pretty different topic, but another great sampling of what it's like to be a student here at Brown. So I'm going to put a link to register for those things into the chat. And again, thank you to Professor Cameron, thank you to the admissions team and Sarah Birch, and thank you for all of our attendees today.